think we'll get started. We're just about one minute past 3 o'clock. And at the same time, thank you, Catherine. Welcome, everyone. My name is Stephanie Tom. I am the Deputy Director for Broadband and Digital Literacy at the California Department of Technology. Thank you so much for joining us today. I was just saying, I think some of you have joined some of the other sessions as well. This is our third session today, so I feel like maybe we should have pushed this back a little bit. It would have been a little bit closer to happy hour, but that's okay. So we'll have a discussion around the Broadband Action Plan detailed outline, which we shared at the California Broadband Council on October 23rd. And we, by design, of course, structured these listening sessions to take place the week following the council sessions because we wanted to hear from you. So I just wanted to introduce my colleague, Anne Neville Bonilla, who will be facilitating the discussion with me today. Naturally, we met with you about a few weeks ago for the first listening session. And then, of course, this is the second and the final listening session. Although this is the final listening session, of course, there are alternatives to provide your public comment. You absolutely can still provide public comment via the California Broadband Council email at any time. And then also, of course, you can attend the California Broadband Council meetings where you can join in on the discussion with the council members and then absolutely provide public comment during that forum as well. But we're happy to have you today. We have a 1-hour session, so it's a short session, but I know this would, of course, be much different than the conversation that we had a few weeks ago, which we really appreciated. In that section, of course, we were pretty general. We talked about deployment and adoption, which we'll still hear do today. However, now we have some structure, right? Now we have an outline that we shared in advance of the council meeting, and we really wanted to dig deep into that outline. And I'm sure that everyone on this call has specific feedback if you haven't already provided it via public comment, and we wanted to hear from you. So we're just going to have a very free-flowing conversation. For those who had joined some of the previous listening sessions, we had slides and we wanted to prompt that conversation, but we're just going to be asking questions on this one. Again, keep it free-flowing. Before we get started, what I did want to share is, what we've done since we last got together. What has the council done? What has my office done as CBC or California Broadband Council staff? What is some of the analysis that has taken place? So since the time that we met at the end of September and held that listening session, of course, we've been heads down focusing on the action plan and wanted to make sure that we're moving in the right direction, which we'll be asking you, of course, for feedback on that. But we really took some time to make sure that we listened to the feedback. We have been taking a look at the notes. We have digested all of the information from the listening sessions, from the council meetings, from written public comment, from verbal public comment. We have massaged that information into, frankly, a master spreadsheet of actions, what we felt were requests from the various stakeholder groups to say, what are some of the recommended actions that we need to pay attention to? What's going to help move the needle and truly move the needle in the short term and the long term to be implemented or integrated into this plan, which, by way of reminder, will be reviewed and updated annually. So we do want to continue to have the plan be visionary and aspirational, but at the same time, we need to put some real key stakes in the ground and have some movement, maybe make some big, bold changes or improvements to make sure that we can meet the goals that we've set either in the short term or the long term. From the last time we met, we also took a look at, as a part of those recommendations from this group, in particular from the providers, we derived about, I think it was 20, I'm looking at some notes too. Our complete list, by the way, of recommended actions was over 200. A part of those, about 30 of those came from this group in particular. And then 70% of those actions, and admittedly there's interpretation there, right? Because that's not necessarily how the conversation took place. But about 70% of those were around deployment naturally, and then 20% around adoption, and the rest around funding. So what we wanted to do today, of course, was to discuss with you more specifically either questions around those actions or about some of the comments that were made, but in particular talk about the flow of the document and where we needed to go. So any questions, comments, or feedback before we get started? And you're welcome to come on camera if you would like. I think we have a little bit smaller group than we did last time. Last time we had about 50. Looks like we have about 43, but any questions or comments? Okay. So as I mentioned, we posted the action plan to the California Broadband Council website. It's available for your review and reference. We will continue to do that, of course, as we move forward. I will say, outside of the comments that we've received from this group, you know, many of the comments were similar and conversations that we've been having, frankly, over the past few years, right? So we took a really close look at where do we need to improve or remove barriers, lots of discussion around permitting, lots of discussion around rights of way. So what it helps us do is, of course, make sure that we're focusing and prioritizing around the right areas. So just to know that regardless of whether it was in the listening session for the community, the listening session for here providers, or listening session for local governments, a lot of the communication and what we're hearing is similar, but it does help us, of course, know what's current and what some of the concerns or what some of the successes are today. But the first question, what we really want to ask you on a general level is, for those, and hopefully you've reviewed the detailed action plan, are we going in the right direction as far as even the vision statement, as far as some of the key data, and the direction around the recommended actions, short-term and long-term? What's your general feedback on the document right now and where it's going?
Hey, Stephanie, it's Walter Hughes with Comcast. I'll start if that's all right.
Yeah. Hey, Walter.
Hello. You know, just as far as general observation about the flow of the document, I'd be willing to bet all the ISPs on this call that have been participating in this forum, I'd be willing to bet we'd all suggest, as it reads and as it flows, it seems like there's this suggestion, if we only do these things, there are real easy fixes to close the entire digital divide in California, to bring high speed, low cost broadband internet to every single address in California. And maybe we're just too sensitive because we've been dealing with it for a number of years. But that's kind of how, as I first read it, that was kind of my reaction. Like, I wonder if we're setting ourselves up for failure, if we're not setting the right metrics, and really saying, look, success can look different ways to different people. And I completely understand and appreciate you got groups that are part of this process that nothing short of a fiber connection to every single address in California is the only way we measure success. As long as you would accept that there are other voices here that would say, well, let's be a little more economical with the resources that we do have, and that success might look certainly different than that. So just off the top of my head, that was kind of my first thought on the flow of the document. I don't know if others want to weigh in, or Stephanie, if you have thoughts about some openness to at least making it look like this is a bigger challenge and much harder to achieve than maybe the first read looks.
So can you give me a little bit more specific feedback around why you felt it looked like that? Was it because, and I'm not to put words in your mouth, I just want to know specifically, right? So I want to get really concrete. And this is what I've been trying to do, frankly, on the other listening sessions as well, is when you're saying the flow looks like we're setting ourselves up for failure, naturally that's not what we want to do, which is why we have short-term and long-term actions. But given your perception of that, is it because we either talk too much about, later in the document about what success looks like and how we're going to get there? Or is it, do we need to spend more time on the shortcomings today? Like, give me an example.
That's a fair question.
Or is it just your feeling?
Try to be succinct. I almost would like to say the truth is California is ahead of the curve. If you compare us to other states and even countries, the ISPs in the state, we have done a great job. And maybe it's almost, and maybe I'm too defensive, but maybe there needs to be some recognition of the more than $1 trillion that have been spent to bring 98% build out to a big populous state. That is not easy. It's not easy geographically. To be fair, it's not easy on the regulatory side. Yet with all of those challenges and burdens, think of that. It's a 98% build out. So maybe it's almost upfront in the document, and I don't know where you'd put it, if it was in the introduction or vision.
Yeah.
And people have been doing this, working in this industry a lot longer than I have, but not that long ago, 15, 20 years ago, build out was, you know, by regions of the state, and then it became by counties and then cities and neighborhoods. Over those 20 years, the build out from the industry perspective has been spectacular. Of course, there are donut holes and there are rural areas of the state that lack broadband. There's nobody would deny that, but I just wonder if there needs to be some recognition up front of all the incredible successes that all the companies, private money, or very little subsidized with public money, that network has been built with private money.
Stephanie, this is Jackie. Yeah,
Yes.
thanks. Yeah, Jackie Kinney with CCTA. Thanks, Walter, for that. Flows what the kind of overall comment that I wanted to make, and whether this is incorporated into the vision or somewhere up front in the document, it really builds on what Walter just said. I think it is a need to sort of recognize that to close the digital divide in California, and especially just focusing on the infrastructure deployment side, it just takes a huge amount of funding. It's a huge amount of funding. It needs private investment and you need public funds. And so the first part of that overall vision is to really have in state policy in the plan, and that it recommends state policy and fostering a regulatory environment, establishing a regulatory environment that really fosters the maximum private investment of infrastructure deployment. And that can include details later in the plan. You know, how do you do that? You streamline permitting, remove unreasonable obstacles, government approvals, et cetera, to deployment, and including access to utility poles that communications infrastructure is strong upon, and rights of way. And also to really, as part of that regulatory environment, to foster the maximum private investment, really respect as a state the federal jurisdiction over broadband as an interstate information service. And the more you incorporate into this document, you know, recommendations that you're going to have state regulation of broadband rates or state public utility type regulation of broadband, that will be a disincentive to private investment. So again, we think the first part of this overall vision is to, you know, policies and a framework that really fosters maximum private investment. And then the second part of that overall big framework is, you know, again, consistent with longstanding universal service principles, that then you use public funds to subsidize infrastructure deployment where there is market failure, where there is no business case for private investment, and you have these remaining unserved pockets for that very reason, because of, you know, sparse population, remote rural areas, now even the high cost because of fire danger, and all the other factors that make there be just a lack of a business case for private investment. That's where you target the public funds for. And then sort of pulling those two things together, a key part of the strategy of, you know, implementing the vision for the public funds is to make sure that you have a prohibition on use of those public funds to overbuild the infrastructure that's made with private investment. And for that matter, to not overbuild infrastructure that has already been subsidized by public funds. Because both of those parts, fostering maximum private investment and then targeted smart use of public funds, is just going to be essential to solve the huge challenge of getting everyone connected, given the economic realities. So again, whether that fits in the vision or somewhere up front, I think it flows from what Walter's saying. It's a recognition of private investment and then how to strategically use the public funds.
Thank you so much. I appreciate that. John Paul, I see you have your hand raised. Before you speak, I just want to also recognize, I know Travis Finch, thank you for noting that you're with Velocity Communications. And I see that you had agreement, of course, with Walter's comments. I did want to address Walter, so I appreciate your comment, and I knew just by way of this first question, I actually was really excited to ask it for this group in particular, because I know this group by nature of being coming from industry, you understand what I'm saying about positioning and flow and the opening of the document. So I appreciate that. I do want to note naturally, you know, we absolutely want to make sure, and that's why we're having this session. And I keep saying that, right? But it's true. And I mean it. I think everyone now knows that I truly mean it. Even in AB 1665, right, that statute's put in place specifically talking about how critical it is to have the right public-private partnership. And we want to continue that. And I appreciate Jackie's recommendations too, because that's going to be imperative. Funding is continuing to be at the top of our discussions, because yes, we need to figure out what that structure is going to look like, where is that funding going to come from, and what we need to do to move forward. So I appreciate those suggestions and those comments, and I am taking a lot of notes. In addition to that, this is being recorded, in addition to the fact that we post it on the CBC website, and the team goes through that again, by the way, so know how much effort and how much this means. So John Paul, please, you had a comment?
Yeah, I wanted to start with that. I'm really thrilled that we are working on a California State Broadband Plan, and that an aggressive, progressive approach to this is good. We want to set ourselves up to win and do well, and I think we want to be beyond where we've been limited before. I live in a community where I applied for a CSF grant a number of years ago for a project, and the project was delayed for a long time because of fixed wireless providers and getting approved. And then the last 3 months before we were to be approved, Comcast came swooping in and claimed they served 600 homes there. So that process is flawed, because we actually drove that area that was contested, but we couldn't do it in real time. So we actually let those homes not get connected. Comcast maybe had 20% of those homes connected, and they were telling other people it would be anywhere between $5,000 and $10,000 to actually extend the wire in those areas. So I think what we have here is, I'm great that the big providers are taking care of the areas they're in, but I would hope that the plan allows the new providers who are stepping forward, like ourselves and Race and Sonic, to be able to build out without having to prove that these areas are served or unserved. That data should be provided very clearly from the providers that are challenging, and it shouldn't be up to us in any kind of plan to go forward with that. And I do want to say that I think to say that the United States has one of the best broadband infrastructures in the world is really a fallacy. If any of you had a chance to read Susan Crawford's book, Fiber, it's backwards in here, but it's Fiber, F-I-B-E-R. It really gives you a great overview of what the problem here is in the United States. And I know Susan, Comcast is not a big fan of Susan's because of a previous book, but in this book, she really goes into the heartland and tells the stories of why we need better infrastructure here. And so I think, anyhow, that's my response. I want the plan to be able to point out that there are municipalities and smaller providers that would like to build, and having less constrictions or from the big providers saying we actually provide service there when it actually isn't true would make it easier to build the networks here. And I know I've been working with private investors, and they do want this public-private or publicly funded and privately funded partnership. And there are a lot of investors in the country now who are seeing that type of infrastructure investment is key.
Great, thank you. So yes, I don't know if I forgot to mention that we'll have another session. The guest speaker is going to be Susan Crawford from Fiber. So, no, I'm just kidding, it's not. Walter, that was for you, Walter, sorry. I just had to make a comment. Rochelle, I saw your hand up, sorry. It's late, you guys have done like 3 of these, and I'm sorry, go ahead.
You've got to be punchy because I've watched a couple of them. So it's like, so thank you. That's my first overall comment. Again, you guys are amazing. I do want to get some feedback on the flow. I mean, I think it's good, but you know, getting granular, which I know that's what you're asking for, is I think some better explanation. You know, like for instance, when you're talking about social and economic opportunity, I think definitely being aspirational, but also granular will help. I think for people to be able to see what it means. I know that you're looking at getting more information on like telehealth and bringing in some of those medical providers. But when it says social, I think being able to talk about what does that mean? Like for instance, right, in COVID, that means grandkids get to be able to have a video call with a grandmother who's maybe stranded and can't get there. people being able to have activities beyond just school, that even the social activities. And then from an economic opportunity, right? How are companies staying afloat? There are like some retail shops that are actually doing Zoom calls to be able to sell product to show that they're still in business. I think by being able to do that, that will ignite a little more excitement, because there are a lot of folks, myself included, who've been working on broadband stuff for well over a decade. That's just in the rural space, let alone in general. And then from the IoT and agricultural piece too, about really being able to find, I know in one of the earlier calls today, I can't remember who it was that brought up agriculture, and that if you actually, if you wire the ag industry, right, then that helps your rural piece. So that's all. When I was reading through it, I mean, there's some really great stuff, but I think if we can just define a little bit more there, like I said, I think it'll get more buy-in, so it doesn't just feel like it's, government and industry and some nonprofits, but this is really kind of harkens all the way back to the governor's, statement of broadband for all. So people have an opportunity to see that nexus between their day-to-day life and what this huge effort that we're all working on could happen.
Okay, great. Thank you, Rochelle. I appreciate that. We definitely are working on bringing pieces to really humanize what we're talking about, right? We want to make sure that we're not just frankly talking in like broadband jargon. We want to make sure that there are specific examples. And something that I did talk about in the community session, which I will definitely offer, and I know that the providers have a ton of examples, and this is by no means a guarantee per se, but we are looking for successful use cases. I mean, absolutely, there have been scenarios and situations where there's been stellar public-private partnerships, in particular coming out of COVID. I know that the providers have gone above and beyond, but with that, so if you have, and I know they're there, so just to help us as we continue to gather specific data and use successful use cases, please do feel free to share those either through the CBC website email or with me directly, because I would appreciate that. Before we move on, I did want to just ask, I know Anne is on, and just it triggered me because Walter was saying, hey, we've already had so much, success already. So of course, my colleague, and who I call the master, Anne Novelbania, has been in this space for decades as well. And so, Anne, did you have any comments just around basically where we've been and where we need to go in particular? And the reason why I'm asking again is because you've been with the state and in the scenarios for quite some time.
Well, I think, something we heard on the last, several of you were on the call with local governments, and every call we've talked about data comes up, and I having done the first California state map and the first national broadband map, I mean, we're never gonna get perfect. Like that doesn't exist. But I think there's we sort of all agree that if we could not spend so much time arguing about what is someplace and what is not someplace, that we could actually focus on the solution part. So I think there's this question on how might we, I am just putting aside the kind of data, the data that we the state would like now but doesn't have now, but just looking at what does get collected. How might we do that in a way that is more beneficial to everyone, right? I mean, what is, in terms of that process, we heard, as the providers who are all on, who were, know that when there was a national broadband map, it was census block, except in large census blocks, it was down by road segment. Different states had different processes. I think some of those worked better than others. California's has always been largely centered in the PUC. Since the national process happened, the first process wasn't centered in the PUC. It was centered at the Business Transit Housing Agency. It would be really great in thinking about that, that's not something that's going to go away, right? Because no matter how much keeps happening, we are going to want to be able to measure the yardstick. And so, it would be great to think about, you know, what people would like to see there in ways that would work better for everyone. I mean, we heard, you know, John Paul's point was also something that was made during the local government session. At the same time, you know, providers have concerns that sometimes data is coming in that isn't, and it's an area where they, you know, substantially already are. So I would like some feedback on that. I think would be really helpful, because certainly the data piece is going to be a piece of the plan. And at least the piece, if we could talk a little bit about the piece where everyone is already providing. I see, Walter, you took yourself off mute, so yeah, let's go.
Thank you, Ann. It's more of a question, so I apologize to put you on the spot or back on the spot, but I'm curious if you've given some consideration to shape files, getting away from census block data and looking at shape files. I know as an industry, it's something we've tried to promote. We think it's a better way to determine where our network lies and where we can better figure out to expand our network into what we call truly unserved areas. So I'd ask you, like, do you have experience with shape files, and do you have thoughts on that?
Yeah, I mean, I would say I'm in the lucky position that I'm now at the state library, so we don't do any of that anymore. But you know, I think shape files can make a lot of sense. Question becomes it all goes if there's no reason you can't overlay shape files on top of census geography and see where things actually split out. We at the national level, when we did it, we did the census blocks were at that time, just much smaller, orders of magnitude smaller than census tracts were. And that's why they made a lot of sense. It's challenging west of the Mississippi because blocks are a lot bigger. But it makes a lot of sense. It's I think it again just goes to the being able to kind of demonstrate, being able to demonstrate some service. We did have, I will say at the national level, we had a lot of challenges with fixed wireless providers who often provided concentric circles about their service area. And that was something we did a lot of work on to really make those more accurate, because those were really, really best guesses that weren't that accurate. So I think that was a lot of work that we did then, and I think probably has to continue to be able to make those work. Do you think your data would be easier to use for planning and to be able to, if you were able to submit shape files instead of by census block, or you were able to show partial served, things like that?
We do. I don't think it's an ultimate solution. It's not elegant in the sense it doesn't take into account everybody that lives in an unserved area. As a matter of fact, I'd love to hear John's thought on that, because his point the comment that he made earlier is well taken. I understand issues with incumbent ISPs and the challenge process. The way, and maybe I think of shape files a little too simplistically, which is we can take our existing network and on a shape file have it account for geography and topographical issues as we're looking at parts of the state that we're going to expand our network. And this is beside whether or not we would take public money or the challenge process or anything else, just our business folks and engineers deciding, okay, where can we build our network to capture more customers? And that's the technology they use, because we can see exactly where our plant's at, how contiguous it is to areas that we don't currently serve. And they're pretty accurate. I mean, they get it down to the penny of what they think a build out and maintenance and ongoing costs would be. And I always just thought to myself, like, why wouldn't that be a better process in a public money, like the Advanced Service Fund? Why wouldn't we look at a process like that to show incumbent ISPs, you know, areas that they could apply for money and areas that conceivably they could challenge projects if they're, you know, if they do give a timeline that they're going to build out to. I just always thought to myself, maybe that is the better way to utilize maps.
I don't know if John Paul, you wanted to add or respond to that before we move forward.
I mean, clearly every provider knows where they're hooked, who they're connecting. There's a database of addresses. It could be as granular as the addresses of location provided. This is for CSF funds. I think the broadband plan is much bigger than this, that what we're trying to deliver here. But as far as CSF funds, every provider knows where their customers are. I mean, the wireless providers know exactly where their customers are. And, you know, when we were challenged by them, you know, they're like Ann was saying, they were putting these big circles out and saying we cover everything. So I think there could be a more granular level of assessment for those particular funds. But beyond that, I think, yeah, that's it on that. That'd be my response to it.
Okay, great, thank you. I also just want to note, I know Bernie, you made a comment in the chat about CASF funding and the CASF program, looking at that program and looking at, I don't want to use too big, bold words. I did hear some words, let's say in the previous session, about reforming CASF, leveraging existing programs, and know that, of course, those discussions are taking place, and we're aware of that. And then, of course, from Travis, appreciate your comment around verification, of course, of census blocks, and then really not wanting to promote or encourage any overbuild. So I understand that comment as well. I wanted to ask another question about the plan. Again, it's a general question, but we really want to be able to be pretty open in this discussion, which is, are there any areas that are just truly contentious that you've seen? I know Jackie made some comments earlier about, gosh, this is just going to de-incentivize, you know, the ISPs, but areas that you saw that you feel could be truly contentious or that you were just against. I know it might be a little provocative, but let's have the discussion. And if not, then we're going in the right direction. Okay.
Hey, Stephanie, this is Steve. I think part of it, part of the thing that kind of hit me, and I think it's a matter of language. We all know that we would like everybody to have access to robust internet, without question. But when we start kind of going back and forth and touch on, and maybe that this is just sensitivity that we have, looking at it from the standpoint of a utility, and then what happens then? Okay, if it's a utility, then we ought to be able to tell you how to do it, when to do it, how much to charge for it, and all that other stuff. Mm-hmm. And we're going to have issues with that, obviously, as we start looking at that. So maybe it's, you know, we know we want everybody to have it, absolutely, and that's what the wireless industry, like, by the way, I'm with CTIA. We want to do that. So as we look at it, I think we may have some issues with maybe just the way we phrase some of the things and what we're trying to get at and some of these things. And so it's, I wouldn't say it's a confrontational issue. I wouldn't say it's a blow-up issue. I would say that it's something that we would like to be sensitive to, and we'll probably will raise that and maybe look at how we can maybe rephrase some of those things as we move ahead.
Hey, Stephanie, it's Walter.
Yeah, why don't we go, and I wanted to have, actually, I want to have a clarifying question on that really quick, Steve. So is it that as we start to use the word utility that we're getting so close and there's fear around regulation, or is it broader than that?
Yeah. No, yeah. I mean, I think that's, I mean, and it may be more nuanced than that, but I think that, you know, as we, from the wireless industry, it's completely and totally competitive, never one penny of subsidy to get where we have today. And now we're at a place where, hey, you know, we may want other people to have access to your networks, and we may want, and maybe we should regulate you more strongly, even though at the federal level that you can't do that. But I don't think that's a productive exercise as we're going forward, you know, and looking at it in that way. We want to find ways so we can provide as many people as we can, the most robust internet as we can. I saw a couple of phrases in the notes like, okay, it says more than just incentives. When I hear it's more than just incentives, I hear mandates. I hear other things that are going forward. And again, it's just in the notes section and my first kind of preliminary review of this, and I apologize for not having looked at it earlier, but I think we would like us to be more sensitive to some of the phrasing in that as we move ahead.
Okay.
Can I chime in on that as well, please? Yeah,
Sure.
Jack, CCTA. And again, this kind of maybe goes to some of the preliminary setup at the beginning where, like Steve said, you talk about the need for everyone to have it, but that doesn't necessarily translate into like using the reference to public utility, that there could be more description of this is a landscape of a competitive market, a wide range of services, technology neutral references, you know, different customers have their broadband needs met through different technologies. But it is a real challenge to have a document that would recommend public utility regulation of broadband service.
Okay, got it. Thank you for that clarity. I think Walter, you wanted to chime in, and then I don't know if Anne, you wanted to chime in. I thought there was someone else that got off mute, but a caller. And maybe,
I have a comment as well. This is Melissa Slauson. I'm happy to wait my turn though. Hi.
No, go ahead.
Stephanie, I'll be quick. When you were first bringing up that next issue, were you talking in particular about like the speeds in the section in the draft report about insufficient standards? Were you asking for input specifically on that section?
On any section, frankly. I mean, really the question is around where's going to be, and kind of Jackie alluded to that earlier, which I appreciate, where's going to be the real sensitive spots. And again, it's not that we're not aware of, you know, the concerns by you guys, the providers, or any of the dynamics there, but given where we're at today in the document, and again, there's no promises here, right? But I do want to hear directly from this group about your interpretation, your perspectives, and what we should be thinking about.
You know, just a thought, you know, as you're trying to figure out what are the proper speeds, you know, what is an appropriate definition of high-speed broadband, I wonder if you add a graph or something that says, okay, for a family of 5 that are distance learning and work for home, these are all the different activities you could do with 25.3 or 110 or whatever, you know, that you could build the chart however you want. I'd be willing to bet that would help you kind of narrow down, okay, what is sufficient broadband for a family? And I think it probably, obviously it varies. The ISP members that are part of this process probably disagree than maybe some of the consumer advocates. But I always tell people, just go to the applications themselves. If you look at Zoom's website, it tells you exactly what kind of speed and latency standards you need. And other applications offer similar, you know, suggested speeds. And when it came last year during the whole argument of the symmetrical standard, and I know it was an aspirational goal, or in some of the documents, it was an aspirational goal. In others, it was going to be the standard. But we always asked, and I don't know that we ever got the great answer, what are the current applications that necessitate symmetrical standards? And I don't know that you ever heard from anybody that was pushing that angle, what those applications were. Or, hey, Stephanie, a family of 5, 1 kid's on Zoom, 1 parent's on a video conference chat, they need 100 down and 100 up. That's the only way it works. I'd be willing to bet you never saw examples of that either. So maybe a graph that everybody agrees to in your report would be helpful.
Sure. So know that we absolutely, so one, the whole for, I guess, you know, the whole that everybody agrees to, probably never going to happen, but I do think it helps shape the conversation and put down really a standard or definition to that. So I appreciate that feedback. We absolutely, because the plan is an action plan, we are going to be very concise, and to help ensure that it is concise is we are going to have clear data sets and graphics. So that will be in there, and exactly what that looks like, of course, we're on our way. So other comments?
I think maybe Melissa, then John.
Thank you. Yeah. So hi, Melissa Slauson from GeoLink. So my comment is not directly related to Walter, so I don't want to skip around if others had comments on that. But I was seeing some language in the preliminary draft that, as a fixed wireless provider, gave me concerns, only because it's very focused on fiber. In particular, on page, let's see, what page is this? Page 8. I think I'm looking at the right document, but on page 8, it says informed by a few data points, and number 6 says operational and network upgrade costs of different technologies. And then it specifically says future-proof deployment fiber versus short-term alternatives. And respectfully, I mean, ours are not short-term alternatives. If we are building a gigabit pipe to a school or a library, we're intending to be the service provider for that school or library, for example, or business or home for as long as they want us around. So I understand that the term future-proof generally goes with fiber, but I think that's kind of a dangerous slope, because it really limits the ability to be flexible for builds in rural areas, for example, where fiber may be so cost prohibitive that it's never going to happen. I mean, that's why we have the, I'm going to say 2%. I don't know if that depends on what standard you're using, but we're talking about, you know, how folks are saying 98% of the state is served. But, you know, let's just assume for the purposes of this conversation that's true. But if we have 2% outstanding still, it's because those areas aren't getting that wired technology, you know, that fiber in the ground, for example. And so those, if we're only going to focus on fiber, those areas will never be served. And if the standard changes, which GeoLinks has certainly advocated for, at a minimum 25/3, which is what the FCC has said is high-speed broadband, then there's going to be a lot less than 98% that are, quote, served in the state. And the issue remains, if we're focusing only on fiber, that's going to stay the same way. So I would ask that we be more flexible and more technology neutral if possible. Focus on the idea of hybrid networks so that we can reach more areas.
Okay, thank you. And I'm seeing, appreciate the +1s in the comment too as well, taking note of that. And sorry, Anne, who did you call? Yeah, thank you. John, did you have a comment? Or I see Nate just showed up. I don't know if Nate had a comment. Hi, Nate.
Hey, thanks so much, Stephanie, and everyone at the council for all your hard work. I just wanted to chime in specifically on the document. You know, we spent a lot of our comments, I think most people did last time, talking about barriers to deployment, but I didn't see those really reflected in the document. So for example, like on the vision, I think a vision is for, you know, to remove barriers to deployment and have deployment be as efficient as possible in California. So we think that should be added there. And then when we're talking about broadband in California today, we talk about insufficient standards and the other limited data and the other things. I mean, barriers to deployment is a key one there, and that needs to be addressed. And talking about the fact that, you know, it's a total patchwork all around the state. Some local governments are doing it quickly and serve as a best practice example. Others, you know, take years and it's a nightmare and it's extremely costly and there's litigation. So that's just a reality that needs to be highlighted, because, you know, we have thousands of permits around the state right now that could be done and brought online to help people get access, but we're being delayed at the local level because of permitting issues. So I mean, I think that really needs to be added to the document. And then there were some comments made on earlier today about, you know, short-term versus long-term goals, and some people were saying, oh well, maybe we need to push things out longer term. But I mean, we kind of see it as we're already too late, right? It's already been months since the pandemic's hit, and there's already a lot of things that could have been done to help expedite things. Like the governor of Colorado did a 45-day expedite for existing broadband permits that were pending, right? So I feel like there's definitely things that could be done in the short-term section around deployment. And so I just wanted to highlight that as well.
So then, and I was just going to say, because from what we heard last time and what we continue to hear, of course, is the permitting challenges with local government. So if you just had one barrier to remove, would that be it?
Well, I mean,
just one.
That's a lot of barriers. That's not just one.
I mean, in our submission, we kind of highlighted the different solutions that could be undertaken. So under the overarching umbrella of barriers at the local level, there's a variety of issues, everything from aesthetics, and hearings dragging on and different things like that. And sometimes it's almost like, the local jurisdiction kind of brings the problem on themselves in a way by making it more cumbersome and longer than it could be. Whereas some local governments, like what we highlighted, we just did 16 miles of fiber deployment in Long Beach because they allowed us to do an aerial fiber strand, and they had a permitting process where we were able to be more efficient. And so, different things like that, we're able to do things more efficiently, I think makes a huge difference.
Okay. And I understand there was definitely, as you said, a laundry list, and there's, many different things that could be helpful, with local government. I guess my ask is, frankly, similar to the private sector, where you have to take a look at where you're going to focus your resources, your time and attention. You have to prioritize. That's why I'm asking this question, right? So if we're able, no guarantees to help support and focus our conversations or energy somewhere, where would it need to be? And that's actually where I know we just have about 10 minutes left, and I want to still continue the conversation. But if you had a couple key recommendations that and I am of course taking copious notes, but if we had to focus a couple key recommended actions from this group, what would they be?
Stephanie, this is Steve. I think that the council has, one of the things it can be is beyond, I think, specific granular recommendations, is to have a bully pulpit on some issues. And I suppose that what we would be asking is if there was a way for the council, maybe not in every, go city to city to city, and that doesn't sound realistic, but a bully pulpit as part of this that recognizes that there are barriers to deployment at the local level that really need to be resolved. And, you get a little bit of, give us a little bit of help, as we move forward on this. I'm not asking, I think, for, you to show up at the city council meeting at wherever, although I think a lot of us would say, hey, that'd be great. I don't think that's realistic. But, a bully pulpit that puts that as a bullet item, that's really, really important. And, obviously, it's for us, that wireless, I think, does play a bigger role in all this than is often given credit for, and maybe isn't necessarily focused on as much as we might think would be useful in an overall broadband plan.
Sorry, before we move on, Steve, can you just go a little deeper on what you just said about sort of the role of wireless and the broadband plan?
Well, and maybe it's just me picking it out, but it seems that the focus on this is largely on the in the ground stuff, not so much on the over the air stuff, and maybe I'm just sort of focused on the other stuff. So so again, and I think some of the statistics are here that in some cases in some of the underserved communities, access to broadband is almost exclusively through their wireless, is through wireless. So I guess from our perspective, perhaps we'd like a little more attention on the wireless side as we're looking at kind of the needs and the benefits that can flow from an overall broadband plan that is, again, technology neutral, without question. But somehow or other, it just seems to me that this is really much more focused on the landline side of things than it is on the wireless.
Thank you. I thought that's what you were saying, and I just wanted to make sure. Thank you.
Yeah.
And if I may, Anne, I have something specific, and Stephanie, I'll be getting this to you probably tomorrow, Monday at the latest. Is so I want to echo, Steve's concern about it does seem very heavy. But to give an example, is that for every node that's built, there's fiber that's there, and that fiber is not just to the node. When we build out, that fiber is available to become fiber to the home with other partners that come in. So just give you a small snippet. We're doing a project in LA. By the end of the year, we're going to have over 35 miles. Over half of it is in South Central LA. It's in all 15 districts. So that's going to be a full build out, 902 nodes. But that's going to be upwards of 40 miles worth of fiber. That's 40 miles of fiber to the wireless nodes that, again, could also be available for partners of other people being in the conduit. And so I think that becomes really important to see. And even as great as they have been about, the reason we can get almost 40 miles is because they adopted micro-trenching. And they're working with us on a regular basis to try to draw down even the 6 months it takes their permits to be able to expedite that even faster. Because what they're seeing is, so for all these miles that are on, those are all, community members that are, and so in this particular build out, the estimated is about 15 million customers that are going to be positively impacted. And so this is just from April to December to put it into, and that was because they were committed to saying, okay, we really need fast deployment, and they're having that. So to meet some of these aspirational goals, so I just want to give you that as like a very concrete example of what could happen if we didn't have micro-trenching adopted there and we didn't have a commitment from the jurisdiction that they want to bring these communities online. We would be talking years for the same project. To give you a quick comparison, trying to do something up north, a much smaller project. So that's going to be about $6.5 million project. To try to just do 6 to 7 miles, like in San Francisco, is $12 million. And that's only about 2.5 million customers, if that, and it's so cost prohibitive, it's on hold. And I'm sure that the folks that are on this call can go back to their teams and have similar stories. And so I think that's where I think the biggest thing that I really want to be able to reiterate is details become really important so they could see this. And then the last thing was I also echo the bully pulpit piece to be able to remind communities that they're a big part of this. They are actually the biggest part. So all those council members and other people that are receiving complaints from their school districts, they are actually have the power to make a difference because investment flows where it can actually be deployed for the least amount of headache. It's always not, I know we often get heard from other partners that it's just, that ISPs only go where the money is or where the customers are. It's not always that focus. It's people want to build out networks. I mean, that's just, it's not, something magic. And so I don't want to take all the time, but I just thought it might be helpful for you guys to see just that stark of a comparison over something that's actually a pretty minor innovation that can have a massive payback in a very short time.
Thank you. Jackie?
Yeah, I have a few specific things, and I think her comments really emphasize the point I was making at the beginning, that sort of your vision and framework really needs a component that is about state policy fostering private investment and removing those barriers, because then that would also reduce the need for public subsidies. But I had a couple other specific things that are in the current draft, if I could just kind of list them off quickly. On page 3, there's some new language about the confidentiality of data. And it appears that this is written in a way as if it sort of sounds like there's more of an absolute, like we shall get the data, but we just want to make sure that there's recognition of the need for confidentiality on some of that data, whether it's because it's proprietary in a competitive environment, customer privacy, or also cybersecurity. Those, it's not just black and white on confidentiality on data. On page 6, there's a reference to reforming the surcharge to pay for a lot of broadband initiatives. We just want to make sure that the discussion here is broad enough that it isn't just about reforming a surcharge mechanism that we've had going past, but especially to the extent that there's an interest in funding broadband for economic development, for agriculture, for all sorts of other purposes, that really should lead to a discussion about general fund or all sorts of other types of funding sources, that the customer surcharge just may not be appropriate for all of those, and to not have it be so narrow to just be about reforming the surcharge. We have a concern with the comment on page.
And Jackie, sorry, really quick. These are things that we reviewed one-on-one and that you guys officially submitted in public comment as well, correct? As opposed to net new?
Well, I'm responding to some of the new language that I've seen in the revised.
Okay. Okay.
Yeah, yeah. So on page 9, there's language that refers to obligate wholesale leasing of fiber access. I don't know if that's sort of an open access type thing, but we definitely need, you know, there's a lot of concerns about open access, particularly if it's not referenced in terms of something that might be voluntarily proposed for a CASF applicant versus just an across the board open access requirement on private ISPs. And then just one other point on speeds. I think it's really important for all of the discussions on speeds to be very clear on what the purpose of the speed designation is. You know, are you specifying a certain speed because that's an eligibility criteria for, you know, a CASF grant or some other public subsidy? Is it a build to requirement that a grant recipient must build to? Or is it a speed that we just think is sort of the aspirational, we would love for everyone to have broadband at this speed? But if it's not tied to a specific purpose or a specific action, it's unclear what the relevance is in terms of how the plan would lead to specific actions to help close the digital divide. So thanks for that.
Great, thank you. I know we just have a couple minutes left. I do want to turn it over to Anne to see if she had any additional questions or comments, and then of course to the group as well.
I've got nothing. I'd rather, let's see here if anyone else has got something.
All right, we'll leave it to the group. Nate?
Yeah, I was just going to say on the solutions section on the barriers, sorry to go back to barriers to deployment, but you know, we put this in our submission, in our comments, but you know, I think if there was some specificity around a state standard, you know, like a certain amount of time that locals had to approve or deny permits, I think if that was in your action plan, that would send a clear message, and then hopefully that would translate into action at the state level. But
okay, quick. So Anne, this is clarification of the question that you had in our discussion. This is just also to prove to you guys that we actually really go through the comments. There was a exchange, Anne, you and I had over email, and you're like, what exactly did you mean? So this is exactly where this came from. So it's about specific time frames around the permitting. So you're hearing it live. Sorry, keep going.
And I think let me ask the follow. I think we've heard, you know, Jackie, when you said if the state said, please follow what the FCC has said to do, is, you know, which is, you know, all acknowledging continues to be challenged, if they're, you know, and that's ongoing, right? I mean, everything in telecom is always litigated, like we all know. So, but that is the current standard coming from the FCC. They have, and if we said, you know, please follow that, I mean, you know what I mean? But, and then is there more on top of that? Like, Nate, is what you're saying different in terms of the kind of barriers that you're seeking? I mean, and I think, you know, I think you are, you know, well aware of the balance we're, you know, trying to strike. We want to be able to see deployment. We also know that, you know, there are legitimate concerns within government. There are places, as you mentioned, like Long Beach, that are, you know, doing things that seem to make it really easy. And I think trying to really understand why, you know, why can't that happen everywhere, right? Why is that, you know, is that something that's scalable? Sorry, my dogs are now barking. So I'm going to go on mute and see, but I would love to be able to understand what would be the hope for in there.
Hi, this is Mark Rosso from Assemblymember Eduardo Garcia's office. Just wanted to add a thank you to Stephanie and the rest of the team for all of their presentations today. I got to listen to all of them, and each one, I will say, has been individually valuable from hearing from each different kind of community group. So thank you all for participating, and thank you, Stephanie, and everyone for holding this as well.
Thank you, Mark. So I know Nate or Jackie, thank you again, Mark. Good to hear from you. Nate or Jackie, did you want to address the question that Ann had? I know we're running a little bit over. We'll probably just go a few minutes over.
And I apologize, Ann, I didn't quite get the specific question. I was trying to follow. I apologize.
Well, I think is it, would you, if what we said was follow what the FCC is saying, would that solve all the problems? Or is there, are there other issues that are not solved by what the FCC currently, currently says must be done? And then I think the other side of that is if there are places where things are working really well in the state, like Long Beach, right, which also has this really kind of great comprehensive program with, adoption and with infrastructure and all of that. Is that something that is, is that planning scalable, right? Are there opportunities there that you see? And knowing that, I know Crown Castle put a lot of things specifically in your comments in terms of what you'd like to see, but it'd be helpful. Is it more than what the FCC says to do, or is it different than?
The problem in the real world is that, they get around that by doing different things. Like, for example, if there might be overhead utilities that we could run fiber on, but they're going to require undergrounding. So that's going to take longer and cost more. Or they might come up with their own aesthetic requirements and that it's just not technologically feasible. And so you're not able to deploy a project that way. Or the fees are, extremely expensive. And so there's just a lot of standards at the local level that, that are not based on federal law, right? So there's just a lot of examples of things being done at the local level that's causing delay. And so again, I would just point back to our comments on what those specific problems were and then our specific solutions to those problems. And at the end of the day, a specific time frame, like if the action plan were to say, existing broadband permits that are pending should be approved within 90 days, for example, and future permits should be approved within a certain amount of time, all that would be very helpful to at least set the framework of what our goals are.
And I know that's something Walter also raised in the first, in our last session as well. Thank you.
Are there any other burning comments? I do want to be sensitive of your time, and we are about 3 minutes over.
Yeah, Stephanie, this is Steve. The only burning comment I have is that I can't believe I didn't mention 5G yet. I'm in this discussion, so but we will.
We were taking bets.
Yeah.
Well, I didn't actually say it, right? I didn't actually say it, but we do believe that will be a major source of a solution, particularly in the urban, suburban areas on the capacity issue. And I think certainly that's what Nate and Rochelle have been pointing to as we try to move that forward. It has been very difficult. So we think it's a real solution that doesn't require subsidy, and it is not rolling out as fast as we think it should. And we will bring that to your attention in our next set of comments as well.
Okay, great. Thank you. Well, I do want to wrap up this session and just express, of course, my gratitude for your time and attention today, and for even those that attended the other listening sessions earlier today. We appreciate it. Know that we are listening, and know that we are working very hard to understand the concerns and the sentiments, and frankly, to find the right balance, right? We're not necessarily looking, we know not everyone's going to be happy, but we have to find the right balance. We do want to push the envelope because we have to move the needle. But at the same time, we also want to know what's feasible and what makes sense. And so there's just this constant, back and forth of, again, what do we need to do today, right now? And I hear you, Nate, on something very simple, what seems very simple, just to have some time frames around when you have to have an agreement or an approval. But we are mindful of all of those, and then we continue to march forward to think about what we need to do in 2021. And then what will be helpful to be positioned for subsequent years, because the action plan will be reviewed and updated annually, as a gentle reminder. And then with that, of course, our next California Broadband Council meeting is November 18th, and we will post the draft, ideally at 80%, prior to that meeting as well. If you have any additional questions, of course, you guys know where to find me, and please continue to submit your comments and suggestions. We appreciate it. And with that, we'll close the session. Thank you so much. Thank you.
Thanks all.
Thank you.